Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series, The Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time, and today we have 1989's Mechanized Attack. I know it was on NES, but it is a much inferior version, so I consider this unported. Also, things you need to worry about if it bothers you: flashing lights warning, you have now been warned. But I love two things: unported arcade games and light gun shooters, and because Mechanized Attack has both in one package, of course I'm going to be predisposed to like this game. But I will say, as far as SNK's light gun games are concerned, this is my least favorite of anything they have done. I would rather play the original Beastbusters than Mechanized Attack, but that is just because it has the horror element. This game is as fun as something like Beastbusters. It just has way more of a military shooter theme than it does that horror vibe, and if you know me and you know the channel, you know I love those horror light gun games. But SNK was making games a long time before the Neo Geo existed, and these are just some of these games, and it is wild to think this came out in 1989 because it looks absolutely incredible, and that's why I don't consider the NES port to be a true port, because it is so much more graphically inferior with the changes than the arcade original. If you want to experience Mechanized Attack, you'll want to either buy a PCB or you want to emulate it in MAME. The NES version is fun, but it is not the arcade original. And you'll see here that we have gotten by the first stage. And what I love about Mechanized Attack is it's constantly showing you something new, because you'll see here we landed safely, and now we're going to have a little bit, not of a mini game, but of a different type of level layout in between each round. Because you're going to see that we have an emergency icon, and now we're going to be in a stationary screen, having to destroy every single tank that comes towards us before we can move on to the next round. And it's not just things like this. The game likes to play around with what it is doing and what it is showing you, because we get to the beginning of this second stage here, Infiltration. There are these scrolling circles that go back and forth. You can only shoot an enemy when they appear in the circle, or so it seems. I never killed one behind it. And you need to really see what's coming, when it's coming up, and deal with that screen space and your gun at the same time. I don't think I've ever actually seen this in a light gun game before, so if you can think of an example, leave me a comment down below, because I don't ever remember seeing something like that. It's only like 45 seconds, but it is something new and something fresh, and I love when games kind of experiment around with this. Now, I will say off the top though, this is not an easy game. You're constantly having to shoot enemies, and they're on opposite sides of the screen at the same time. This is the type of game that's going to become much easier if you have a human second person playing next to you. I guess you could try a cat or a dog, but I'm going to use that human exemption there to say they're probably better at aiming. But again, as we get to the end of this stage, the boss fights are fun. They're just not the best I've seen SNK do. Compare the boss fights in this game to something like Beastbusters, and they definitely pale in comparison, not just because they're not horror, but because you're just shooting another enemy who has a special sprite as he goes back and forth. And the bosses do get better as the game goes on, but it definitely doesn't show you too much excitement at the beginning, and that is why I definitely still put this underneath Beastbusters. But obviously it's called Mechanized Attack, and you'll see there I took my first death. Get used to taking those. But some of the enemies are robots. You can shoot their flesh off, and you'll see that exoskeleton underneath there. Definitely inspired whole cloth by the Terminator franchise, but that's okay, because honestly, who doesn't want to shoot Terminators, even if we're not calling them that? And in stages, the scrolling will stop, and it'll give you a sub-boss here and there, just a train we need to blow up. And you will see I saved those grenades. Save your grenades, save your rockets that we just picked up here. Only use them if you're about ready to die, or if you have a boss or a sub-boss. Saving those weapons up is going to get you out of a jam, and it's going to do a lot of damage to the boss and mini-boss, versus just unleashing it on a regular screen, because you can take a lot of hits before your health completely runs out, as you will see there at the top left-hand corner. But if your health is low, make sure you waste them all, because you're not going to be able to carry them into the next life. But honestly, that's just really good advice for any light gun shooter where you have power-ups. But again, it's just a blast to see SNK before Neo Geo, because if you know the channel, you know I love Neo Geo and Hyper Neo Geo, but SNK did exist long before that, so it's fun to see what they were doing in that interim process. And I will say this game has a decent soundtrack that is going to be flooded with gunshot noises, so go ahead and listen only for like 30 seconds this time, and I'll come back and tell you more about the game and what I think. Enjoy!
You are dead.
I mean, it's a good soundtrack for what you can hear, but that happens in pretty much all arcade light gun games. The bullet sound effects kind of drowned out the background music, but I do enjoy what SNK did with the soundtrack for what you can hear of it. But as you can see here, as you get later into the game, things just get a lot more wild. There's so many different ships coming in, planes, tanks, Terminators, sort of mechanized soldiers, everything is going on at once. But that's why I say that this game can feel cheap and is much better as a two-player experience, because you want somebody to handle the right side of the screen and you want somebody to handle the left side of the screen, because this game definitely does not feel like it is designed to have a one-player experience, because it just has so many things on screen at once you need to deal with. But you can totally just dual wield if you decide to and play both players at the same time. It's a little harder, but it is a ton of fun. And I just love, as we get further into the enemy's base, how things get a little bit more dramatic and some of that pun intended mechanized nature of the game comes out. Because pretty much at this point in time, all of the soldiers you were shooting are going to be faux Terminators. I'm surprised that nobody actually stopped SNK from doing this or lawyer got involved from the Terminator franchise, because it's definitely just a Terminator in slight disguise. But the final boss, or at least the first final boss, is absolutely hilarious. It is a giant brain in a jar, and you can't go wrong with giant brains in giant jars. But I say kind of the first boss because this game has a 2-loop system. Once you beat the game once, it's going to put you on another loop, and that's how you're going to see a little bit more of what the game has to offer. But I will say this final boss is absolutely cheap. It is a bullet sponge, it is shooting things from all directions, and you're going to waste a lot of credits and you're going to waste a lot of grenades and bullets to finally blow that jar up. Now obviously I'm not putting real credits in this machine, so it doesn't matter to me whatsoever, but if you were in arcades you might get tired of quarter munching in this particular area. What you will see once we beat the final boss, we're going to get a little bit more story. Obviously, like any military game, we've destroyed the base and the enemy computer gave up. But now it is going to tell us there's more missions and there's a second loop. Now I'm just going to show you more content from the first loop that I haven't already used, because the second loop, in my opinion, really isn't that worth it. It's one of those things, if you want to play, why 100% go for it. But you can see the first loop of Mechanized Attack. It went about 15 minutes from start to finish, and there are a lot worse ways that you could spend that 15 minutes. I just wish that it was more Beastbusters. Give me a Beastbusters 2 before we get to Beastbusters Second Nightmare on the Hyper Neo Geo. But honestly, it's just because I've never been a huge fan of the military theming, but SNK obviously was, because in some ways this feels slightly like a precursor to the NAM game on the AES and MVS. Obviously that's more of a running gun shooter than it is a light gun shooter, but SNK was into the whole military vibe, and they 100% used it here in Mechanized Attack. But it is just a ton of fun. I would say this is like an 8 out of 10 experience. It would be a 9 out of 10 if it had a little bit more horror in it, but that's just me. But it is just the type of game that you should play for 15 minutes, experience it, and enjoy it. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you ever played Mechanized Attack? Do you know where a cabinet is, or did you learn about it for the first time from this video? Because I love hearing when people discover new games. And this boss is just fun. I don't think 3 fighter jets could fly this close in real life and not crash into each other, but maybe they are piloted by fake Terminators and that's why they are so good at flying. Leaves you open to a ton of different opinions. But yeah, this is one of those games from before the Neo Geo ever existed, and a lot of people don't know as much about SNK pre-Neo Geo as they do Neo Geo and post. But give it a play. I'll be back next week with more videos, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well, but I'll see you next time. Bye bye.